Hello, Marge, and all the women of the Kansas League of Women Voters. Thanks for letting me present at your meeting today. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I have an appointment of my own which conflicts. I am going to make this video with the camera pointed at the TV screen, and so that's why you're seeing a picture and a biography of me instead of actually seeing me, because I brought that up on my computer. What I'm going to do is tell you about a new project that I have been working on with journalist Peter Hancock of the Lawrence Journal-World, my colleague Chapman Rackaway of Fort Hays State University, and our colleague Kevin Anderson of Eastern Illinois University, with some suspense voter data. Suspense voters, of course, as you know, are the voters whose registration is not complete because they did not provide proof of citizenship as required by the SAFE Act, which Secretary of State Kobach championed through the state legislature. And I believe that you can use some of this data to more precisely target your efforts to get these voters to complete their registrations. For example, by targeting certain census tracts which have particularly high concentrations of suspense voters. And so I'm going to walk you through this. Coming up on your screen as I talk, you'll see different graphics that I have made which summarize some of our findings. And I think you'll find some of these quite interesting. And so let's start with the basics. Our project used two voter lists from the Kansas Secretary of State's office. One of them required an Open Records Act request, and that is a list of all the suspense voters in Kansas as of fall 2014 before the midterm elections. The second one was a list of all the registered voters in Kansas, active, inactive, and suspense voters, which we got in June of 2015. And included voting history so we could see how many of those suspense voters not only completed their registrations but actually voted in the midterm election. All right, let's start out with suspense voters as a percentage of the total. And here comes a chart for you. And let me just make that full screen and move that over a little bit. And that is not useful, is it? Okay. There we go. All right. As you can see, suspense voters make up a fairly small percentage of the total. The column on the left is all voters. This is suspense voters, and this bar, which is so tiny you can barely see it, is suspense voters that completed their registration. So our overall voter list had 1,710,316 names, and our suspense voter list had 23,691 names. That means that the combined list includes about 1.3% suspense voters. Not a lot, but keep in mind that we're still talking about 23,000, and that number is up considerably, as you all know. I think you have more current data. This was as of fall of 2014. And as you know, many close elections are decided by less than 1.3% of the votes. The next thing we did is use a computer program to search for duplicates to see how many voters, the suspense voters, actually completed their registrations. And the answer is, it was, first of all, we cleaned up the list for voters for whom we did not have complete information. And so on our cleaned up list, the active voters are 1,556,354. The suspense voters are 19,986. That's right here. And then the suspense voters who completed their registrations, 3,705. To put this another way, 16% of all suspense voters completed their registrations between fall of 2014 and summer of 2015, and of those, 5.6% not only completed their registrations but actually voted in the midterm elections that year. That's pretty low voter turnout. Let me show you a chart on the voter turnout. Here we go. So, of all voters, the turnout rate in the 2014 midterm elections was 45.4%. That you will see right here, the bottom bar. Of suspense voters, the turnout rate in 2014 was 5.6%. Much, much lower. And this, of course, would only be the suspense voters who completed their registrations. The other ones wouldn't have been eligible to vote at all. And then finally, if we just look at the subset of voters, those 3,705 suspense voters who completed their registrations, the turnout rate was a little bit better. It was, let me see here, forgive me, I don't have the statistics right at hand, but it was somewhere between 30 and 40%. So, as you can see, for suspense voters who complete their registrations, the turnout is not too bad, but it's still lower than it is for all voters. But for suspense voters in total, who have to complete their registrations and vote, the turnout rate, 5.6%, is pretty dismal. The next part of our project was to look at differences in party registration, and I think you'll find that those differences are really quite striking. Let me show you that next. Here it comes. There we go. Over here, you'll see the percentage Democrats with the blue bar representing active voters, the orange bar representing suspense voters, and the gray bar representing suspense voters who completed their registrations. And as you can see, there are more Democrats among the active voters than there are among the suspense voters. But it's not as big of a distinction as among Republicans, which is here. As you can see, the percentage of active voters who are Republicans is much, much higher than the percentage of suspense voters. And the percentage of suspense voters who completed their registrations, it comes up somewhere in between. The big story is over here on the right. These are our unaffiliated voters. And as you can see, there are far, far, far more suspense voters who are unaffiliated than there are active voters as a percentage who are unaffiliated, and almost as many of the suspense voters who completed their registrations are unaffiliated. So the numbers come out like this. I apologize. I don't have the precise statistics here. I thought I'd written them in the paper. I'm going to need to revise my paper here, but you get the idea of what an enormous difference there is in these percentages. Most suspense voters are unaffiliated voters, and keep in mind that that means that they can't vote in party primaries, because Kobach championed another law through the legislature that ended Kansas's semi-closed primary. It used to be that unaffiliated voters could vote one time in the party primary of their choice, and then they would be re-registered as members of that party. But that was ended recently under legislation championed by Kobach. So all of these suspense voters who are unaffiliated cannot vote at all in the party primaries. You also know that many districts in Kansas are uncompetitive politically. So the winner of the Republican primary in many parts of Kansas is effectively the winner of the election. In a few areas of Wyandotte County and Lawrence, the winner of the Democratic primary is effectively the winner of the election. but throughout most of the state it's the Republican primary, and then there are a handful of districts for State House, State Senate, and well, I don't know about Congress, but certainly State House and State Senate, which are actually competitive. Anyway, the party primaries are the big story in a lot of Kansas elections, and all of these unaffiliated suspense voters that can't vote in the party primaries make for a troubling finding. What about differences between men and women? This is another issue that's received some attention. In our own data, we haven't found anything too remarkable on that one. Let me show you this chart here. And here we go. As you can see, not a whole lot of differences here. By the numbers, it is 52.9% of active voters, that's this bar down here, are women. Of suspense voters, it is 50.6%, slightly fewer women, and of those who completed their registrations, again, it's slightly fewer, 48.7, but not a lot of gender differences there. There was some concern that these laws may target women, particularly because of if they've changed their names upon getting married, and it's different from their birth certificate, it could be a real hassle for them. It is true that the lowest percentage of women is that we see among suspense voters who complete their registrations. However, there's not a whole lot of evidence that the laws are systematically targeting women. The next topic is age, and this is another one that has received a lot of attention. And as you'll see in a moment, there are huge differences in terms of age between suspense voters, regular voters or active voters, and suspense voters who complete their registrations. Here comes the chart. And let's make it full screen. And there you have it. Big, big differences on the average age. Among active voters, which is our bar over here on the bottom, the average age of voters is 51 years old. This is voters, the average age of active voters, on the registration list. Among suspense voters, it drops quite a bit. See this drop in the bars? It's only 38. And the interesting thing here is that the big drop is down to 30 years old. That's the average age of suspense voters who complete their voting registration. So clearly, there are a lot of the suspense voters who in fact complete their registrations tend to be quite a bit younger. And as you'll see in another graphic I'll show you shortly, it appears that many of them are college students. The next project we did is one that gave us a little bit more complicated graphic here. I'd like to show it to you. It is the census tracts which have the highest percentages of suspense voters. Where do the suspense voters live? Well, statewide, again, it's about 1.4% of voters on the suspense voter list. But what about the census tracts that have the highest percentages of suspense voters? We used a tool called the geocoder from the U.S. Census to track people's addresses on those lists and find out where the suspense voters are most heavily concentrated. And as you can see from this map, the big story here is Sedgwick County. We looked at the 10 precincts which have the highest concentration of suspense voters, and 5 of the 10 are located in the city of Wichita. Sedgwick County, Wichita is the big story here. We also looked at those census tracts to see what the population makeup was. And as you can see, with a lot of these census tracts, they have a higher percentage than the statewide averages below the poverty line, and many, though not all, have a higher percentage of African American and or Hispanic residents. Median ages vary quite a bit. Not a lot of a pattern there. But big news on the poverty and particularly the African American population. So in these Wichita census tracts with the highest percentages of suspense voters, for example, one has 41% below the poverty line, 137.5, 125.6, 139.8, and one has a stunning 53% of residents below the poverty line. And that compares with the statewide average of only 14.5% of voters below the poverty line. Likewise, in terms of African American population, looking at the Wichita tracts, the statewide African American population is about 13.2% of population, but in these Wichita census tracts, with the most suspense voters, we have 27.8%, 8.5%, a little lower on that one, 6.1%, again lower. Another one's 14.3, just a hair below statewide averages, but look at this last one, Census Tract 8, 92.8% African American population. Likewise, some of these areas have a larger than average Hispanic population. The statewide average is 16.3%. In these Wichita tracts, it's 30.9%, 14.2%, 12.4%, 26.2%, and 5.5%. So a couple of them stand out for their large Hispanic populations. We also found some tracts in other counties. There are two in Johnson County. One of them is what we might call an inner ring or changing suburb. It's an area whose percentage in poverty and diversity is not actually as high as the state, but it's higher than the averages for Johnson County. And that's this second census tract in Overland Park, with 15.2% African American residents, 10.5% Hispanic, and 13.3%. Now, all of those are not that remarkable compared to state averages, but this census tract is a good deal more diverse and less wealthy than the other ones in Johnson County. There was a second census tract there in Johnson County that was kind of an anomaly. It was not very diverse and it's quite wealthy. It's located in Prairie Village. And they've only got 4.7% of their residents below the poverty line and not a large African American or Hispanic population. We're quite frankly not sure how that one got on there, but it's our responsibility to report all the data. Let's take a look, though, at this Douglas County census tract. This is a really interesting one because it's right at the heart of the University of Kansas campus, and that really stands out when you look at the average age of its residents, only 19.7 years old. It's not terribly diverse. And it appears to have a large percentage of residents below the poverty line, but a lot of those are probably students who in fact get financial support from their parents or student loans or both. So we don't take that too seriously, but it is very telling that we found one of these census tracts with suspense voters on the largest university campus in the state. A lot of college students apparently popping up on the suspense voter list. And I know the League of Women Voters has also targeted some of its work in Douglas County. Finally, we had one in Shawnee County, Topeka, and the demographics of that one look a lot like the Wichita census tracts. We've got 24.7% African American residents plus 25.5% Hispanic and a very high 45.8% below the poverty line. So one Topeka tract that looks very similar to several of those Wichita tracts. So that's the data I wanted to show you. What does all of this mean for the League of Women Voters project to register these suspense voters? Well, in my opinion, what this means, or what it may mean, are that you may want to think about using some of this data, and I and some of the other political scientists on our team are happy to help you do this. You may want to think about using some of this data to target where your appeals will be the most effective. I would particularly recommend homing in on those Wichita census tracts. Oh, by the way, one more footnote. There was a 10th census tract with a high percentage of suspense voters. It was in Wyandotte County. However, it only had a handful of voters. It was probably an industrial area or had a large park in the tract or something like that. It had less than 40 voters, so we just made that one a footnote. But again, getting back to the 9 remaining ones on the list, if we want to bring that map back up, let me show that to you here. Here it is. Clearly, there needs to be a focus on Wichita. That's where a lot of them are centered, and some anecdotal evidence with the Lawrence tract that the universities are a possible focus as well. But heavy focus on Wichita, particularly these census tracts. We have already discussed the idea of community partners. Groups like More Squared based in Kansas City or Sunflower Community Action based in Wichita might be potential community partners that could help you all. We can help you get the data. Now, the Secretary of State's office is not always forthcoming, but an Open Records Act was successful at getting a suspense voter list. I have the means, and so do some of the other political scientists on our team, to help you analyze this with data processing software and get actual lists of voters. The question is how to contact all those thousands of voters, and that's where the community partners can be so critical. Partners, particularly faith-based groups with strong churches in those census tracts, could prove invaluable. I hope you found this helpful, and again, please accept my apologies that I was not able to be there in person with you. I hope to be able to speak to your group in person sometime. But this gives you an idea of what's going on around the state in terms of the suspense voters. In general, suspense voters are not that likely to complete their registrations. A few do, but most do not. They are overwhelmingly unaffiliated, which means they can't vote in any party primary under Kansas's new laws. There's no big gender difference, although they're slightly more likely to be men, but not a big difference. There is clear age difference. Suspense voters tend to be a good deal younger, and those who complete their registrations are even younger still. And finally, suspense voters seem to be highest in several lower income, very diverse census tracts in Wichita, plus the KU campus, one in Topeka, one in Johnson County, and then we had an anomalous finding in Johnson County that was a wealthy census tract. So I hope that sums it up. Marge has my email address and phone number. You all are welcome to contact me with further questions and requests, and I hope we can work together on this very important project. Thank you.